All right, hi, and welcome back to Unit 6, Day 6, one-step mole conversions. This is Part 1, example problems from Part 1. Now, in the previous video, we covered Step 1 of these one-step mole conversion. Remember, there are two steps. The first step is choosing the right conversion factor, and then the second step is solving using dimensional analysis. Now, because these are very distinct and very different skills, we're practicing them separately. And then later on, you'll combine them to solve one whole problem using both steps. All right, now let's focus on Step 2. So Step 2 is solving using dimensional analysis. But before we do that, let's review what we've already covered in Step 1. So in Step 1, our goal is to find the conversion factor. And in order to do that, we needed to find our given and our find. And then we used either the mole map or we chose one of the conversion factors. It's the same process based on the units, okay? So we have all of our conversion factors, the things that are going to allow us to convert from our given to our find. So now how do we solve using dimensional analysis? Remember, this is the setup here, so I'm going to also explain it in words as we go through. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to write our given with the correct units over 1 to make it into a fraction. So we're going to write this thing here, this blue fraction, given over 1. Now, I highlight it here in yellow. If needed, we're going to convert the units of the given first. So like if our units are not correct for our given, then we may need to do some conversion. An example of that would be if you're converting from mass to moles, for example, your mass must be in grams. So if your mass is not in grams, you may have to do one of these conversions to get it into grams. All right. So Step 1 is writing given over 1 and converting the units if need to. The second step is to write the second fraction, which is our conversion factor fraction. Now, the way that we write this fraction is we're going to take our conversion factor and turn it into a fraction. Now, we have to decide what goes on top, what goes in the numerator, and then what goes on the bottom, the denominator. So what's going to go on top will be the part of the conversion factor that contains your find, what you're asked to find. And the part that goes in the bottom will be or the denominator is the part of the conversion factor that contains your given. And the reason why this is that you want, remember, the units of the given to cancel out, right? So in order for them to cancel out, if you're multiplying fractions, they have to be opposite to cancel out. Once we have our two fractions written, now we're going to multiply them together to get our find. And when you're multiplying, remember, you multiply straight across. So the tops or the numerators will multiply together, and then that will be over the bottoms, which will be multiplied together. You want to make sure that you don't forget to cancel out your units. So the units of your givens should cancel out. And then at the end, after you multiply and you get your value, check to make sure the units of your find are correct. Because in some cases, like if they ask you to find, if they ask for your find in a unit that you don't get it in when you do this conversion factor, you may need to do a conversion. So for example, if you're converting from moles to milliliters of gas, well, when doing that conversion, your conversion factor will not have milliliters in it, but it will have liters in it. So that means your find will be in liters. So then you'll have to do one more step to convert from your liters to milliliters using one of these conversion factors. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with an example. So in this first example problem, we're going to start by writing our given, which I've already highlighted in blue just so we can sort of keep track over 1. So I'm going to take this 4.36 times 10 to the 25, and that's molecules. People oftentimes get molecules and moles confused together. That's not the same thing. So remember, molecules, you're just literally counting the number of molecules. Molecules are things that are made up of more than one atom connected together. All right, so we're going to take our given, put it over 1. All right, that's our first fraction. The second fraction is going to come from our conversion factor. So here's our conversion factor, and this is the key step. Remember, I want to get rid of the units of molecules because I want to convert it to units of moles. I'm going from molecules, number of molecules to moles. So that means the part of the conversion factor that has molecules in it must go on the bottom. So what part has molecules in it? That has 1 mole, so that ain't it. So it's got to be this part, the part with Avogadro's number. So I'm going to write this whole thing, 6.02 times 10 to the 23 molecules. Notice I'm using my units to decide what goes on top and the bottom, not the value. So focus on the units. These units are opposite, so they will cancel out, which is what I want. And then what I have left is the 1 mole, so that's going to go on top. Notice that I have 1 mole here, not 1, right? So a lot of times people get confused and they put the 1 mole over here. This 1 is just so that we can turn our given into a fraction. So in the first fraction, there should be a 1 on the bottom with no units. But in the second fraction, you have to have 1 mole because all of our conversion factors have 1 mole. Now that 1 mole may go on the top or the bottom, depending on how what you need to cancel out. All right, so now that we have that set up, now we're going to go ahead and do our multiplication. So remember, when multiplying, we're multiplying straight across. So essentially this math will look like 4.36 times 10 to the 25 times 1 on the top. And anything times 1 is itself. So this is just going to be 4.36 times 10 to the 25. And the same thing in the bottom, the denominator, it's going to be 1 times 6.02 times 10 to the 23. Which is again itself 6.02 times 10 to the 23. All right, so now that we have that done, we can go ahead and plug that into our calculator. But let's first get the satisfaction of crossing out the units we don't want, right? Whoosh, whoosh, they're gone. Okay, cool. All right. Now, when you're putting these type of numbers with, and that's written in scientific notation in your calculator, make sure you use parentheses. So I'm going to start by doing an open parentheses. And then I'm going to do 4.36. Now, if you want, you can actually write out times 10 and then a caret to the 25 and then close the parentheses if you wanted to. But a shortcut for all of that is, right, 4.36, so the coefficient in front of the power of 10. And then you don't even need to do times, just do second E if you have a scientific calculator. That big E is the times 10 to the power. So the only thing you need to write after that is the power of 10. So 4.36, E 25, close the parentheses. So a couple of key things. It's important that you make sure you have this in parentheses. Then go ahead and divide by, same thing on the bottom. So 6.02, I put that in parentheses, second E to the 23. Close parentheses. So these two numbers must be in parentheses if they're in scientific notation. All right, go ahead and press enter and I get this number, 72.4. So that's my values here, 72.4 moles. There's actually 3 sig fig here. So I'm writing my answer in 3 sig fig. Okay, next one. We're going to do the same thing. So let's go ahead and go through this. Step 1, given over 1. So 0.982 moles. And MOL is abbreviation for mole as a unit. Over 1. Right? That 1 is just to make it a fraction. There should be no unit here. Times. This second fraction is going to come from my conversion factor. I got to figure out what goes on top and the bottom. I'm starting with moles. I want my moles to cancel out. So that means I need moles to be on the bottom of this second fraction. Well, what part of my conversion factor has moles in it? The 1 mole part. So I'm going to put my 1 mole here. Not 1, but 1 mole. Make sure mole is there so the units cancel out. And then on top I have 22.4 liters. Okay. Now I can go ahead and do my math. This is going to be 0.982 times 22.4. Over 1 times 1, which is just 1. And when I go ahead and plug that into my calculator, I get 22.0 liters. Remember, if I cancel out my moles, I'm left with liters. That's the unit of my answer. Now the thing here though is that they want the volume in milliliters. So I always want to go back and check. So if that's in milliliters, this is not my final answer. Okay, I need to convert that from liters to milliliters. Okay, so let's go to our conversions up here. It says converting units of volume. All right, I'm starting with liters and I want to get to milliliters. Now none of these start with liters, but this one goes from milliliters to liters. To go from milliliters to liters, I have to divide by 1,000. So if I'm going in reverse from liters to milliliters, I'm going to have to multiply by 1,000. So I need to multiply this number by 1,000 to convert into milliliters. So I'm going to do 22.0 times 1,000. And that's going to give me 22 1,000 milliliters. Now, one key thing here, this is not the correct number of sig figs. I should have 3 sig figs. So if you wanted to write something like this in 3 sig figs, you would have to actually write this in scientific notation. I'm not going to ask you to do that right now, but just so you know that this will be the answer in correct sig figs. But both answers are correct. All right, let's quickly do the last couple of problems here. So we are going to do this setup, given over 1 times the conversion factor to get our find. So my given is 2.3 grams. Don't forget the units. That's super important. Times, all right. So now I need to turn this into a conversion factor fraction, all right? What goes on the top, what goes on the bottom? I'm starting with grams, so I want to cancel that out. To cancel that out, should it go on the same side or opposite side? Opposite, of course, so I know I need to have grams on the bottom. Well, what part of the conversion factor has grams? The 20.18 grams, so that goes on the bottom. Don't forget those units. All right, and then what's left is the 1 mole. That's going to go on top. Okay, so now whoosh, whoosh, my grams will cancel out, and I'll be left with mole as my final unit. So let's go ahead and do the math here. 2.3 times 1, which is just 2.3. That's the math on the top. 1 times 20.18, which is just 20.18. And then if I were to plug this into my calculator, I get 0.11 mole. And there's only 2 sig figs in this case. Okay, so that's my final answer here. Okay. Now for this last problem, because we didn't have a conversion factor, we put it as TBD or to be determined. You're going to leave this part blank. So in your practice, if you see a TBD, then you know to leave it blank. All right, that is it for this video. You are now going to go back to your practice for part 1 and do step 2 as we've done here.